All right, happy Friday. Welcome to the end of the week here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I hope you've enjoyed this week. It's been a lot of fun. I think it's been a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun this week, and I hope you've enjoyed the Morning Pitt episodes this week, the conversations we've had with Damian Dunn and Cam Corrin, Amsal Delilich, and Gilbert Brown yesterday. I think it was a pretty fun one, pretty fun conversation to have there. And to wrap up this week of me being on vacation and still trying to provide some good video content for you, we've got a pretty fun discussion. It's a mailbag. It's a mailbag. It's a Morning Pitt mailbag, but it's a question that was asked probably like 2 weeks ago. And I was like, oh, I like that question. That would be a fun conversation to have. And I didn't get to it that week. And then by the time I got to last week's mailbag, I was like, you know what? What if we just hold this question and cover it in this week's mailbag? Because it would actually be, I think we could actually do a whole episode off of it, and it would be a fun conversation to have. So, I mean, you've already seen the headline, so you already know what the question is, but we're going to be ranking Pat Narduzzi's recruiting classes. What are the best recruiting classes of the Pat Narduzzi era? What's the worst recruiting class of the Pat Narduzzi era? How would we rank the top 5 recruiting classes of the Pat Narduzzi era? That's what we're going to be doing here on the Morning Pitt mailbag on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's a great question. It's kind of timeless almost. I mean, it's not dated, you know, and so we don't have to worry about, you know, all the breaking news this week that I didn't talk about on Morning Pitt episodes. We don't have to worry about, like, nothing that happens, I hope, nothing that happened this week is going to change how we view some of these recruiting classes. But it's fun to rank them, and going back and kind of reviewing some of the classes and looking at what Pitt got and who they got and what those players ended up being. It's been fun mostly. It's been enlightening. It's been eye-opening a little bit. It's definitely been interesting to revisit a few of those recruiting classes. Of course, you know what we always ask you to do before we jump into the conversation. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, to never miss any of our Pitt video content. We churn out a decent amount for you, I think. These daily Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live show, which we didn't do this week because I'm not around, at least, or, you know, the plan as of the end of last week is that we weren't going to do a live show. I don't think I ended up doing a live stream from the beach. You'll have to tell me when I get back. But, you know, we have a lot of video content. That's what it all boils down to. You don't want to miss any of it, so subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and that way you will be locked in for everything we do right here on YouTube. And then we have our website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. Find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out, talking about Pitt sports at Panther-Lair.com, and you can be part of that conversation as well. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. All right, the question: what are the top 5 recruiting classes of the Pat Narduzzi era at Pitt? Just to set the table a little bit, Narduzzi, of course, hired in December of 2014. One of his first tasks was setting out to finish the 2015 recruiting class. We're not going to count that here, just because it wasn't a full Narduzzi recruiting class. You know, I mean, that's not to say it was bad. You know, Rafael Rougeau-Lopes ended up being a good player in that class. Salim Brightwell was a good player in that class. Jordan Whitehead was a great player in that class. Darren Hall ended up having a 1,000-yard season. Dane Jackson was very good. Quadri Henderson had an All-American season. But the reality is, with a lot of those guys, Quadri Henderson was committed before Pat Narduzzi was even hired. He committed in June of 2014, committed to Paul Christ. Ditto for Dane Jackson, committed in June of 2014. Darren Hall committed in August of 2014. Jordan Whitehead, October. Pat Narduzzi did land Salim Brightwell in January of 2015. He gets credit for that. He also gets credit for Rafael Rougeau-Lopes in like May of 2015. But by and large, that class, it's not a full Narduzzi recruiting class. And so we're not going to, praise or condemn him for that class. But we move forward and start with the full recruiting classes, which starts in 2016. And Narduzzi has signed 9 of those, up to and including this most recent recruiting class, the 2024 class, those guys who are coming in to be freshmen right now. So as you can imagine, we're going to have a hard time ranking the 2024 recruiting class. I have my thoughts about these freshmen who are coming in. Same goes for the 2023 recruiting class, although we'll come back and talk about that one in a second. Those guys just finished their first year of college football. Most of them are going to be redshirt freshmen this year. A few are going to be sophomores. And while I definitely have some thoughts about that 2023 recruiting class, we're going to kind of table them from the rankings or hold them out of the recuse them from the rankings because it's just not fair. They've only been on campus for a year. And to be quite honest, the 2022 recruiting class, there was only 13 guys in that recruiting class. I don't know if we can really rank that class against the 2016 group or 2017. When you look at 2022, Kyle Lewis, right? Seems like he's going to be a really good player, but I can't really rank the class based on his career thus far. Ryan Baer was in that class. Sure. Holding out, I think Rylan Gandy is going to be a good player. I think Sean Fitzsimmons is going to be a good player. But it's hard for me to rank this recruiting class. They signed 13 guys. Here's who they signed. Jordan Bailey, Sam Okunlola, Kyle Lewis, Ryan Baer, Isaiah Montgomery, Che Wabuko, Marquand Pope, Rylan Gandy, Addison Copeland, Jimmy Scott, Sam Vanderhaar, Sean Fitzsimmons, and Carter Johnson. Carter Johnson, Sam Vanderhaar, and Addison Copeland and Sam Okunlola have already transferred. Jordan Bailey never even made it. Marquand Pope was a medical exemption. So, you're already down. Like, guys still on the roster. You have Kyle Lewis, Ryan Baer, Isaiah Montgomery, Che Wabuko, Rylan Gandy, Jimmy Scott, and Sean Fitzsimmons. So, there's only 7 guys left from that recruiting class. That was a small class to begin with. They only had 13 guys that they signed, but there's only 7 that are actually here. So, ultimately, that 2022 class is probably not going to be ranked very highly, although the 7 who are here, like Lewis, is probably going to start this year. Baer is going to start this year. Gandy is probably going to start this year. Jimmy Scott will either start or be in the rotation this year. Sean Fitzsimmons will either start or be in the rotation this year. Isaiah Montgomery will be a 2-deep guy. Che Wabuko will be somewhere in there. So there's only 7 guys left, but at least 5 are going to be prominently featured as starters or rotational contributors. And as many as 6 or even all 7 could appear on the 2-deep. So packing a lot of punch into that small group, but it's hard for us to rank that class until we actually see what those guys do. So I'm going to hold off on that. We're really going to look at the 6 recruiting classes from 2016 to 2021. And we're just going to rank them all. I was going to say, well, we're going to rank the top 5 out of those 6 recruiting classes, but and then spend a moment talking about the worst of those 6 recruiting classes, which ultimately means that we're ranking the top 6, right? So here goes. I think there are some areas where we can really get into the details and get into the weeds over a few of these guys, a few of these classes. Well, they had this and they had that. Boy, it's really close. So which one should be here? Which one should be there? I don't think there's any question, though, about which one is at the bottom. And it probably stands as the worst recruiting class in the Narduzzi era. Now, that 2022 class is going to give it a run for its money. It was very small to begin with, and they've already lost like almost half the class. But the worst recruiting class in the Narduzzi era, and we'll start off with the negative and work up to the positive, the 2021 recruiting class. And the irony of all of this, and I just want to say this right off the bat, it was the highest rated recruiting class in the Narduzzi era. Number 21 recruiting class in the country. Number 21. And ends up being, I think, the worst class. It really is. 23 guys signed in that class. Just 5 have gone on to be starters and regular contributors. But I think 11 out of 23 have transferred. Cole Mitchell transferred. Naquan Brown transferred. Kyle Fugetti never even showed up. Dorian Ford transferred. Trey Anderson transferred. Stephon Hall transferred. Khalil Anderson was medically exempted and then transferred. Malik Newton was, Khalil Anderson was here and then transferred. Malik Newton was medically exempted and then transferred. Preston Levant transferred. Miles Alston transferred. Jaden Bradley transferred. That's a huge chunk of the class. Now, there are good players in there and players who have started and contributed. PJ O'Brien is a good player. Gavin Bartholomew, obviously very good. Nate Yarnell, is going to be the starting quarterback this year. Terrence Moore is going to be the starting center. Javon McIntyre, Rodney Hammond, very good. Potential for guys like Nikai Johnson or Tamarian Crumpley. But so much of this class has washed out already, and you've only gotten a handful of really starters and contributors after 3 years of this class being on campus, despite it being the highest rated recruiting class in the Narduzzi era. Why was it rated so highly? Well, it's because they signed 3 4-star guys in Elliott Donald, Nakai Johnson, and Naquan Brown. Brown is already gone. Johnson moved positions and might finally find a home. And Donald might actually, needs to contribute, and he hasn't contributed yet. And so that's a big part of the problem. Another issue with that 2021 recruiting class is that it was the class that was signed. Signed, but also just recruited in the midst of the pandemic. This was the class recruited throughout the year of 2020. So those guys never took official visits in June. They never took official visits at all. None of them took official visits. And Cole Mitchell took an official visit. The very last addition to the recruiting class, he committed in June of 2021, like 2 months, month and a half before report date. Took his official visit that summer. He was the only recruit in that class to take an official visit to Pitt. And the official visits are hugely important for the recruit and for the coaches, but it also speaks to just the entire lack of in-person contact. You couldn't have any in that recruiting class. And I think it has come back to bite them. They recruited off of film and film alone, and didn't have that personal interaction to really find out if they were getting the right guys, and they're paying the price for it. They've paid the price for it because that recruiting class is largely washing out. Some very good players in there, no question. They had some hits. But boy, howdy, is a lot of that class just fading away. And I think that's at the bottom of the rankings. So we start there, and we're only going to work our way up. It's only going to get better. Number 6 recruiting class of the Pat Narduzzi era, the lowest ranked of any of the classes we're ranking, the class of 2021. All right, let's work our way up from there, okay? That's the bottom. Let's go up from there. Recruiting class number 5 of the first 6 Pat Narduzzi classes. We're going to go to 2018. 2018 recruiting class. This one was signed, if it will load, 20 commitments. Recruiting rank was 36. Top of the recruiting class was Michael Salahuddin, who was a 5.9 4-star prospect. The rest were all 3 stars, from 5.5 up to 5.7. This class produced about 8 starters as I worked down the list. Jake Cradle was a starter out of this class. John Morgan was a starter out of this class. Blake Zubovic, Devin Danielson, Marquez Williams. All the other defensive tackles too, David Green and Tyler Bentley. Haba Baldonado was in this class. Eric Hallett was in this class. So you got an ACC championship game MVP in this class, which is pretty good. Haba Baldonado was a good player. Those, Zubovic and Cradle were good. I think Cradle did better than Zubovic. John Morgan was always just okay. I don't think he produced a ton at his career at Pitt, but he was a solid player. The 3 D tackles were solid players and obviously played a lot and got a lot of starts out there. Valik Carter had a few moments of brilliance, mostly against Duke. And then, you've got pretty decent chunk of transfers here. You got about 10 guys who transferred out of this class. Salahuddin, Judson Tallender transferred. I forget if Ricky Town transferred or just he disappeared like he arrived. Shockey Jacques Louis and Noah Palmer and Valik Carter all transferred. Wendell Davis and Cameron O'Neal transferred. Kamar Mims transferred. So you got a decent chunk of these guys. They really kind of came of age in the transfer portal era. And you saw those guys, a bunch of them move on. I mean, the class produced, Nick Patty was in that class. So, I mean, you can throw him in there as well. You got some solid starters. I don't think this class had really the high end that some of the other classes did. Eric Hallett was a multi-year starter, and like I say, ACC championship game MVP. Marquez Williams was a multi-year starter. Good players, but I mean that's kind of where it peaks. Some of these other classes have some really, really spectacular players, and this class really just didn't. They had a lot of solid guys. They had a bunch of starters, but not quite the star power as some of the others. And I mean star power in terms of play on the field, in addition to the recruiting rankings. Now, if you want star power in terms of play on the field and recruiting rankings, I give you the class of 2016. Pat Narduzzi's first full recruiting class. I rank it number 4. They had 5 4-star prospects in the class, but herein lies the problem. Because among those 5 4-star prospects, you had DeMar Hamlin, Amir Watts, Reuben Flowers, Kazon Pugh, and George Hill. George Hill was an academic, medical drop. Flowers and Pugh just never panned out, and both ended up transferring. But this class produced a lot of guys. I think I got about 8 starters out of this class. Damar Hamlin, obviously, like I mentioned, Keyshawn Camp and Amir Watts were starters. Maurice French, Bryce Hargrove moved into the starting lineup on the offensive line. Phil Campbell was a multi-year starter for Pitt. And then, a couple of guys named Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver. And really, this class, I mean, you talk about that high end of the class. That's 2 All-Americans, plus Damar Hamlin as an NFL draft pick. Maurice French set a Pitt record for receptions in a single season. I mean, you have some star power. You might have roughly the same number of starters out of this class as you got out of the 2018 class, but you had that high end, really take the top off sort of superstars in this class that you didn't have in the 2018 class. So that's why I put this group here. There were a lot of misses. I mean, it was a big class. They signed 24 guys. It ranked number 29 nationally. But you had a lot of guys that you had Flowers and Pugh, like I mentioned. George Hill was a medical issue. Theron Coleman transferred. Thomas McVitie transferred. Shantez Moss either transferred or was kicked off the team. Zach Gilbert was a medical. Henry Miller transferred. Brandon Ford, I think, just hung it up. I don't know if he transferred. I feel like he might have had some eligibility left. Bryson Garner transferred. Zach Williams, I think, might have never made it in the first place. Justin Morgan transferred. Elias Reynolds transferred. So a lot of guys who were pretty hyped as recruits ended up not really panning out and they didn't hit the transfer portal. They just left. It was pre-transfer portal, I think, when those guys vacated or left the team. But you had that high end. And that high end is what separated this 2016 class and moved them up to the number 4 spot. And I'm actually curious to see. Oh, I know why. I was kind of curious about why this next class went even higher, given the star power of that 2016 class. But I know why. It's the 2020 recruiting class. 18 recruits in this class, only a number 44 ranking on the team recruiting rankings. They had 3 4-star prospects: Dayon Hayes, Javonte Royal, and Rashad Battle. And there's this theme that you see. I said in the 2016 class where you had a bunch of 4-stars and some of those guys didn't pan out. Here, this 2020 class, you have 3 4-star prospects. 2 of them didn't, one has already transferred. Let me start again. 3 guys: Dayon Hayes, Javonte Royal, and Rashad Battle. Hayes was was a starter and went into the transfer portal. Royal never really started or played. He's in the portal. Rashad Battle is a 4-star prospect. He's still here, but he hasn't really done much, largely due to injury. What this 2020 class has, though, and I mean, we can run down the list of all I think 11 guys out of 18 have transferred, 11 out of 18 have transferred. But the other 7, well, I shouldn't even say it like that. 11 out of 18 have transferred. But among the players in this class, of course, you have Jordan Addison and you have Izzy Abanikanda. And that right there, you talk about star power. You've got the Biletnikoff Award winner, the best wide receiver in the country. You've got a guy who broke Tony Dorsett records and I think led the ACC in rushing touchdowns, maybe the whole nation. I forget if Izzy Abanikanda led the nation in rushing touchdowns in 22. Branson Taylor's a starter that came out of that class. Ben Sauls has been really good. Solomon DeShields and Bengali Kamara were starters. Whatever you want to say about those guys, they were, and sort of earned that place. There's just a big separation in this class between some really high-end guys and the bottom of the class. And you don't have a lot kind of in the middle. And that's sort of one of the things that holds this class back. But the high end is so good that I put them at number 3 on the ranking of these recruiting classes. So that's number 3. So to recap, 2018 was number 5, 2016 number 4, 2020 was number 3, and for the number 2 class, we go to 2019. In the 2019 recruiting class, Pitt signed 19 prospects. They were number 49 in the country. Out of these 19 prospects, though, you had Servassier Dennis, Jared Wayne, Matt Gonsalves, AJ Woods, Brandon Hill, Brandon George, DeAndre Jules, and Kalijah Cansey, among other guys like Vincent Davis, who obviously played a lot. Bam Brima has played a lot. Nate Temple became a starter last year. Daniel Carter has played a lot. They've had minimal transfers. fewer transfers out of the 2019 class than either of the next two classes that followed or the class that came before it. 2018, there were 10 transfers. 2019 has only had 7 players transfer out. Liam Dick transferred. Will Gibson transferred. Kai Wright transferred. Vincent Davis transferred. Davis Bevel transferred. Bryce Nelms left, and Leslie Smith transferred. DeAndre Jules ultimately transferred as well, but I would count him as a starter contributor for what he did last season. This class, I rank it higher than 2020. 2020 had Addison and Abanikanda, but this class, I mean, you could probably make a pretty good case for swapping these two classes, but I think you had more hits, even if you didn't quite reach the peaks of, Addison and Abanikanda. You still had Servassier Dennis was a great player at Pitt. Jared Wayne finished with a 1,000-yard season. A.J. Wood started a lot of games. Brandon Hill was a really good player at safety for Pitt. Obviously, Kalijah Cansey, a unanimous All-American and a first-round draft pick. I'm actually convinced again about this class. I put this class ahead a little bit more than the 2020 class. I think they had fewer misses and more hits, and some really important starters and contributors over the years. I think this class is really good, this 2019 recruiting class, and I put it number 2 among Narduzzi's classes, which can only leave one. If you've been crossing them off the list, you know which one is number 1, and it's 2017. 2017 recruiting class, 24 recruits, ranked number 37 nationally. They had 3 4-star recruits, Paris Ford, Charles Reeves, and Anthony Davis. Ford, the highest-rated recruit to sign with Pitt in the Pat Narduzzi era. And I think you run down this list and you see just some big-time players. I mean, Jalen Twyman, an All-American season in 2019. Jason Pinnock and Damari Mathis, multiple years as starters, both went on to be NFL draft picks. Deslin Alexandra, multiple years as starters. Carter Warren, a multi-year starter, dealt with injuries, but he was an NFL draft pick. Gabe Hoy, multi-year starter, again, dealt with some injuries, but was still a multi-year starter. Owen Drexel, multi-year starter. Paris Ford, an exceptional season, the only defensive back under Pat Narduzzi to earn first-team All-ACC honors after the 2019 season. And, of course, the class headlined by Kenny Pickett, Heisman Trophy finalist, architect, really the driving force behind the most successful Pitt football season in 40 years. And a lot of these guys had a whole lot to do with that season. Damari Mathis had a whole lot to do with that season in 2021. Carter Warren and Gabe Hoy and Owen Drexel were a big part of that. Kenny Pickett, of course, like I said, was a big part of that. There are misses in this class. There's no question about it. Cam Carter, Michael Smith, Jerry Drake, Charles Reeves, Tyler Sear. Grant Kerrigan stuck around for 4 or 5 years, but never really did much. Albert Tucker, Dontavius Butler-Jenkins, Todd Sibley, Darian Street, Cameron Bright, Kyle Nunn. There's a real gulf between the high end and the low end here, but the high end was really important and some of the foundational pieces of the ACC championship team in 2021. Now, as I sit here and I just recapped the 17 class, the 19 class, and the 20 class, you could probably make a case for any of those 3 as the number 1. I'm going with 17. You could probably talk me into 19 and maybe even talk me into 20 for the top classes of the Narduzzi era. But right now, I think that's where I'm going. You can check the commitment lists on Panther-Lair.com and make your own comparisons and tell me what you think based on what you read and based on what I've said. Now, here's my one caveat that I'm going to add here. 2023 recruiting class. Keep an eye on this one. Let me read some names to you. Cruz Brookins, Jordan Bass, B.J. Williams, Lamar Seymour, Jesse Anderson, Rasheem Biles, Braylon Lovelace, Kenny Johnson, Isaiah Neal, Shadarian Harrison. Some of those guys have already made an impact. Some still waiting for them to make an impact. But that's a class of 19. And I would say that within 2 years, Isaiah Neal, Shadarian Harrison, Kenny Johnson, Jordan Bass, Braylon Lovelace, Jesse Anderson, Lamar Seymour, Rasheem Biles, B.J. Williams, Cruz Brookins, at least those 10 guys out of 19 will be starters and top contributors. And you might even be able to throw in like some of those other receivers, Lamar Seymour, Zion Fowler L. You might be able to throw in Montravius Lloyd, maybe will make an impact by then. Maybe Tyree. Izzy Polk has already transferred. Antonio Kamen has already transferred. But I think out of a class of 19, I think you're looking at least 10 starters and top contributors with the potential to push that number to maybe 12. And probably a few guys who are going to be playing at all conference levels. I think that 2023 class is going to be really, really good. And maybe the best of the Narduzzi era. I'm doing a lot of projection there. I'm doing a lot of, based on potential. But I think that class has a chance to be really good. And I didn't even mention any of the offensive linemen. Well, B.J. Williams, because he already started as a true freshman. But Ryan Coretta and Ty Ray were in that class too. And I think there's potential for those guys as well. But just on the guys that I think we have a feel for, I think that class is going to be really good. So when we do this again in 2 years, I think we're going to move that 23 class into the top 5, maybe into the top 3, maybe even higher. I think that class is going to be pretty good. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts, definitely on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com or even in the comment section here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'd like to hear what you think about that ranking of Pat Narduzzi's recruiting classes. I think he's had, obviously they've had some good players in there. We don't have to recap all the names. You heard me just recap all the names for the last 25 minutes. It'll be interesting to see what we think in a couple years. But share your thoughts in the comment section here on YouTube or on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. That's probably where Pitt fans are going to be talking about it the most. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com for the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Make sure you check it out and hang out there all the time because we have a lot of fun with our conversations on Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. All right, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You don't miss any of our Pitt video content. It's all right here. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. These morning Pitt videos, our weekly live show, etc., etc. Tune in for it all, like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching today's video and all the videos this week. I hope you enjoyed those interviews. We'll be back with our regularly scheduled Morning Pitt programming on Monday. I hope you've had a great week. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll catch up with you on Monday for the next Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.